She had carried that secret for 23 years, but the moment her daughter walked through those glass doors into Alexander Whitmore's office, Jasmine knew the truth could no longer stay buried. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Jasmine was arranging flowers at the small shop she'd built from nothing. Her hands, calloused from years of hard work, trembled as she listened to her daughter's voice, calm, determined, and terrifyingly cold. "Mom, I found him. I'm going to make him pay for what he did to us. 23 years. 23 years since Alexander Whitmore had thrown her out of his penthouse apartment with nothing but the clothes on her back and the life growing inside her. 23 years since she'd walked through Manhattan in the rain, 19 years old and utterly destroyed, knowing that the man she loved, the man who had promised her the world, had chosen his empire over their child. Jasmine had been a freshman at NYU, working nights at an upscale restaurant where Manhattan's elite came to see and be seen. Alexander had been 35, brilliant, devastating, and already on his way to becoming one of the youngest billionaires in New York. He'd noticed her immediately, the way she moved through the restaurant with quiet grace, her dark skin glowing under the chandeliers, her smile genuine even when exhaustion pulled at her features. "Idri, you're different from everyone else here," he told her that first night, his blue eyes intense and focused entirely on her. "You're real. If you're listening to this story and want to hear more journeys like this one, tales of resilience, heartbreak, and justice, make sure to follow our channel. These are the stories that remind us that the truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deep it's buried. She'd believed him. God, how she'd believed him. For 6 months, he'd made her believe she was his entire world. He'd taken her to his private spaces, not the public restaurants where photographers waited, but intimate dinners in his penthouse, weekend trips to his beach house in the Hamptons. He'd traced the curves of her face and told her she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. He'd made love to her like she was precious, irreplaceable, and then she'd gotten pregnant. The memory still cut like glass after all these years, the way his face had changed when she told him, the warmth draining away, replaced by something cold and calculating, the way he'd stood up from his desk, walked to the window, and stared out at the city he was conquering while she sat there, hope dying with each passing second. "This can't happen, Jasmine." His voice had been flat, emotionless. "I'm about to close the biggest deal of my career. My investors, my board, they're watching everything. I can't afford complications right now." Complications. The word had felt like a slap. "We're having a baby, Alexander. Our baby." He'd turned to face her then, and she'd seen a stranger. "You're 19 years old. You're a waitress. Do you really think my world has room for this?" He'd walked to his desk, pulled out a checkbook. "I'll give you money. Enough to handle this discreetly. Enough to set yourself up somewhere quiet, but this ends here." She'd refused the money, refused to handle it discreetly, and that's when she'd seen the real Alexander Whitmore, the man who built empires by crushing anyone who stood in his way. "Then you leave," he'd said, his voice cold as winter steel, "and you never contact me again. If you try, I'll destroy you. My lawyers will make sure no one believes a word you say. You'll be painted as an opportunist, a liar trying to trap a wealthy man. I'll make sure you lose everything." He'd called security. 2 men in suits had escorted her to the elevator while Alexander went back to his conference call, her presence already forgotten. She'd stood on 5th Avenue in the rain, 20 weeks pregnant, and felt her entire world collapse. Now, 23 years later, her daughter had found him. Naomi had always been brilliant, too brilliant, sometimes. She'd earned a full scholarship to Columbia, graduated summa cum laude, and had been recruited by 3 top law firms before accepting a position at Morrison & Associates, one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in Manhattan. Jasmine had been so proud, so terrified that Naomi's ambition would lead her down dangerous paths. "Baby, please," Jasmine said into the phone, her voice breaking. "Don't do this. You don't know what he's capable of." "That's where you're wrong, Mom." Naomi's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "I know exactly what he's capable of. I've spent the last 2 years learning everything about Alexander Whitmore, and now I'm going to be his lawyer." Jasmine's blood ran cold. "What?" Morrison and Associates just won the bid to represent Whitmore Industries in their merger with Castellano Holdings. It's a $5 billion deal. And guess who's been assigned as junior counsel? Naomi laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He's going to work with me, trust me with his secrets, rely on me to protect his empire, and he has no idea who I am." "Naomi, please." "He threw us away like garbage at Mom. He made you suffer, made us both suffer. And for what? So he could build his precious empire. Well, I'm going to walk into that empire, and I'm going to watch it burn from the inside." The line went dead. Jasmine stood in her flower shop, surrounded by the beauty she'd built from poverty and pain, and felt the past 23 years collapse around her, because she knew her daughter, knew the determination that burned in her like wildfire, knew that once Naomi set her mind to something, nothing could stop her, and she knew Alexander Whitmore. Knew the ruthlessness that had made him one of the most powerful men in New York, knew that if he ever discovered who Naomi really was, he wouldn't hesitate to destroy her the way he'd once destroyed Jasmine. The question wasn't whether there would be a reckoning. The question was whether anyone would survive it. But what Jasmine didn't know, what neither she nor Naomi could have predicted, was that Alexander Whitmore had spent 23 years living with a secret even more devastating than the one he'd tried to bury. And when the truth finally came out, it would destroy everything he'd built and everyone he'd ever loved. Alexander Whitmore stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 65th floor of the Whitmore Tower and surveyed his kingdom. Manhattan stretched before him like a promise kept, glittering, powerful, his. At 58, he was at the peak of his power. Whitmore Industries had holdings in real estate, technology, and finance worth over $20 billion. His name appeared on lists of the world's most influential people. Presidents called him for advice. And yet, some nights, he woke up thinking about a girl with skin like midnight and eyes that had once looked at him with complete trust. He shook off the memory. That was weakness, sentiment. The past was irrelevant. Only forward momentum mattered. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Whitmore, the legal team from Morrison and Associates is here for the merger briefing. Send them in." 3 lawyers entered, 2 men in their 50s, heavy with self-importance, and a young woman who moved with the kind of confidence that made Alexander take notice. She was in her early 20s, black, beautiful in a way that was both elegant and understated. She wore a navy suit that was perfectly tailored, her natural hair styled in a professional twist. When she met his eyes, there was no flutter, no nervousness, just cool, assessing intelligence. Something about her made him uneasy, though he couldn't say why. "Mr. Whitmore," the lead attorney, Harrison Morrison, began. "Thank you for this opportunity. We've assembled our best team for this merger. This is James Kirkland, our senior merger specialist, and Naomi Richards, one of our most promising junior associates. Despite her age, she graduated top of her class from Columbia Law and has already demonstrated exceptional strategic thinking. She'll be handling much of the detailed review work." "Richards," Alexander repeated, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm, professional. "Columbia Law. Impressive. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore." Her voice was smooth, controlled. "I'm honored to work on such a significant deal." There was something in her eyes, a flicker of something he couldn't quite read, that made his instincts prickle. But then it was gone, replaced by professional courtesy. The meeting proceeded smoothly. They discussed the merger timeline, regulatory concerns, and potential obstacles. Naomi took notes, asked sharp questions, and demonstrated a grasp of corporate law that impressed even Alexander. By the time the meeting ended 2 hours later, he'd almost forgotten his initial unease. Almost. "Ms. Richards," he said as the team was leaving. "Oh, a moment." She turned, her expression neutral. "Of course." He studied her, trying to place why she seemed familiar. "Have we met before? Something about you seems... I have one of those faces," she said smoothly. "People often think they've seen me before." "Perhaps." He waved a hand dismissively. "I'll be working closely with your team over the next few months. Morrison tells me you're exceptionally thorough. I appreciate that. This deal is critical. I understand, Mr. Whitmore. You can count on my complete dedication to protecting your interests." Something in the way she said it, a slight emphasis on the word interests, made him look at her more carefully. But her expression revealed nothing. After they left, Alexander stood at his window again, that inexplicable unease settling in his chest. He pulled out his phone and called his head of security. "Marcus, I need background checks on the Morrison and Associates team. Full workups. Especially the junior associate, Naomi Richards. Any particular concerns? Call it instinct. Just do it quietly." Meanwhile, across town in a small apartment in Brooklyn, Naomi sat at her kitchen table, a folder spread before her. It contained 23 years of research, everything she'd been able to gather about Alexander Whitmore since she was old enough to understand what he'd done. Her mother had never wanted to tell her the truth. Jasmine had tried to protect her, had spoken only vaguely about Naomi's father being someone from the past who couldn't be part of our lives. But Naomi had been persistent, relentless. At 16, she'd found her own birth certificate hidden in a box in her mother's closet. The father's name was listed as unknown, but Naomi was brilliant, and she knew how to dig. She'd started with her mother's old college yearbooks, cross-referenced with the restaurant where Jasmine had worked. She'd tracked down former co-workers, pieced together fragments of conversations. She'd learned that her mother had been seeing someone wealthy, someone powerful. And then she'd found an old photograph, her mother, 19 and radiant, standing on a beach. In the background, barely visible, a man with sharp features and blue eyes. The photograph had been taken at a house in the Hamptons. It had taken Naomi 3 months to identify the house, trace its ownership, and finally put a name to the man who'd abandoned them. Alexander Whitmore. The discovery had ignited something in her, a cold, focused rage that had driven every decision since. She'd chosen Columbia specifically because it was his alma mater. She'd excelled in corporate law because that was his world. She'd networked relentlessly, positioned herself perfectly, all leading to this moment. Now she was inside his empire, close enough to see the cracks, close enough to bring it all down. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother. "Please, baby, it's not too late to walk away." Naomi stared at the message for a long moment. She thought about the tiny apartment they'd lived in growing up. Her mother's hands red and raw from working 3 jobs. The nights Jasmine had cried herself to sleep thinking Naomi couldn't hear. She thought about the life they should have had, the life Alexander Whitmore had stolen from them. She deleted the message and opened her laptop. The first phase of her plan was already in motion. She'd spent the last 2 years building a network of contacts within Whitmore Industries, disgruntled employees, overlooked executives, people who'd been crushed under Alexander's ambitions, people who wanted to see him fall. But she wasn't just going to destroy his company. That would be too quick, too impersonal. She was going to destroy him the way he'd destroyed her mother, by making him care, by making him trust, and then by taking everything away. She'd seen the way he'd looked at her in that office. The confusion, the faint recognition, the interest. She'd inherited her mother's beauty, her grace. He'd fallen in love with Jasmine once, before his ambition had overridden his heart. Naomi was going to make him fall again, and then she was going to make him pay. What she didn't know was that Alexander Whitmore's head of security was, at that very moment, pulling up records that would expose her identity, or that her mother, desperate to stop the coming catastrophe, was about to do something that would change everything, or that the truth about what really happened 23 years ago was far more complicated and far more devastating than either of them knew. Because Alexander Whitmore had a secret, and when Naomi finally discovered it, it wouldn't just destroy him, it would destroy them both. 3 weeks into the merger negotiations, Alexander found himself thinking about Naomi Richards far more than he should. She was brilliant, that much was clear. Her legal analyses were sharp, her strategic thinking several steps ahead of even the senior attorneys, but it was more than her professional competence that drew his attention. There was something about the way she moved through a room, the tilt of her head when she was thinking, the rare smile that softened her features. It reminded him of someone, though he still couldn't place who. They'd begun working late together, just the two of them after the rest of the team left. The merger had complications. Castellano Holdings had hidden liabilities that kept emerging, requiring constant strategy adjustments. Naomi had proven invaluable. Her attention to detail, uncovering potential pitfalls before they became disasters. Tonight, they were alone in his office at midnight, surrounded by contracts and financial documents. The Manhattan skyline glittered beyond the windows. Naomi had taken off her jacket hours ago, and Alexander found himself watching the way lamplight played across her skin, the elegant line of her neck, the intelligence burning in her eyes. "Oh, you're staring," she said, without looking up from the document she was reviewing. He didn't deny it. "You remind me of someone. I can't figure out who." She met his eyes then, and something flickered in her gaze, something almost like pain. But it vanished so quickly, he thought he'd imagined it. "Maybe I remind you of who you used to be," she said quietly. "Young, hungry, determined to conquer the world." "Is that what you want?" "To conquer the world." "I want justice." The words came out harder than she seemed to intend. She softened them with a slight smile. "In legal terms, of course. I want to see the right outcomes prevail." "And what makes an outcome right?" "When the people who've been wronged get what they're owed. When the powerful can't just crush the powerless without consequences." There was an edge to her voice that made Alexander lean back in his chair, studying her. "You sound like you're speaking from experience. Everyone has their wounds, Mr. Whitmore." "Alexander," he said. "When it's just us, call me Alexander." She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her weighing something, calculating. Finally she nodded. "Alexander, then." The moment felt significant somehow, like a line being crossed. Alexander stood, walked to his bar cart, poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to Naomi. "To justice," he said, raising his glass. "To truth," she countered. And something in her tone sent a chill through him. They drank, and the silence between them shifted, became charged with something dangerous and electric. "Tell me something real," Alexander said suddenly. "Something not in your polished resume or your carefully constructed professional persona. Who is Naomi Richards when she's not being the perfect attorney?" She took another sip of whiskey, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm someone who keeps her promises. I'm someone who never forgets. And I'm someone who believes that eventually everyone has to answer for what they've done." "That sounds almost like a threat." "Does it?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I suppose it depends on what you've done." The tension between them was thick enough to cut. Alexander moved closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. Attraction, yes, but also a kind of recognition, as if some deep part of him knew her, had been waiting for her. "I've done a lot of things," he said quietly. "Built an empire, crushed competitors, made hard choices." He paused. Hurt people I cared about because I cared more about success. Any regrets? The question landed like a blade between his ribs. He thought about Jasmine, really thought about her for the first time in years. The way she'd looked at him the day he'd thrown her out, her hand instinctively protective over her barely rounded belly. The way her face had crumpled when she finally understood he meant it, that he was really going to let her walk away into nothing. He'd told himself she'd been a liability, a complication he couldn't afford. He'd told himself she'd be fine, that she was young and resilient. He'd told himself a lot of things to make it easier to sleep at night. Yes, he admitted, the word pulled from someplace deep and honest. One massive regret that I've never been able to fix. Naomi's hand trembled slightly as she set down her glass. Why didn't you fix it? Because I was a coward. Because I was afraid that facing it would mean admitting who I really was. Not the self-made billionaire, not the visionary everyone admires, but just a selfish man who chose power over love. The words hung between them like a confession. Naomi stood, and for a moment, Alexander thought she was going to leave. Instead, she moved to the window, her back to him, her reflection ghostly in the dark glass. Do you know what the worst part is? Her voice was barely audible. The worst part is when the people we hurt survive anyway. When they build lives without us, raise children alone, become strong in ways we forced them to become. The worst part is that they don't need us, and they never will. And we have to live knowing that we had something precious. And we threw it away. Alexander felt ice forming in his chest. Naomi. She turned to face him, and there were tears in her eyes, the first crack in her perfect composure. Did you ever think about her? Did you ever wonder if she was okay, if the child survived, if maybe... Her voice broke. If maybe you'd made a terrible mistake. The room seemed to tilt. How do you... Because she was my mother, Naomi said, and the words detonated like bombs in the space between them. Jasmine Carter, the 19-year-old waitress you got pregnant and threw away like trash 23 years ago. I'm your daughter, Alexander, and I've come to destroy you. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. Alexander stared at her, his mind reeling, trying to process the impossible truth. The familiarity he'd sensed. It was Jasmine's eyes looking back at him, Jasmine's grace in Naomi's movements, Jasmine's strength in Naomi's voice. No, he whispered. That's not... I didn't... Didn't what? Didn't get my mother pregnant? Didn't threaten her? Didn't have her thrown out of your building by security while you went back to your conference call? Her voice was rising now, all the controlled fury of 23 years pouring out. I've read every article about you, watched every interview, traced every deal. I know who you are, what you've built, who you've crushed along the way, and I've spent 2 years positioning myself to take it all away. Naomi, please, let me explain. Explain what? That you were young and scared, that you had your career to think about. That's what you told yourself, isn't it? That's how you justified abandoning a woman you claimed to love and the child she was carrying. Alexander's mind was spinning, memories colliding with present reality. I never knew if... I thought maybe she'd gotten an abortion. Is that what you hoped? That would have been cleaner for you, wouldn't it? No messy consequences. No child out there carrying your DNA and your abandonment. Naomi's laugh was bitter. Well, surprise. I survived. We both did. And now I'm here, inside your empire, trusted with your secrets, positioned perfectly to watch everything you've built come crashing down. What do you want? What do I want? She moved closer, and he could see the fury and pain warring in her face. His face, he realized with a shock. She had his eyes, his chin, his stubborn determination. I want you to feel what my mother felt. I want you to lose everything. I want you to know what it's like to be powerless and abandoned and terrified. I want justice. Then do it, Alexander said, his voice hollow. If that's what you came for, do it. I won't stop you. She stared at him, and for a moment, something flickered across her face. Confusion, uncertainty. She'd expected him to fight, to threaten, to be the monster she'd built him into in her mind. "It's not that simple," she said finally. "Isn't it? You said you've spent 2 years positioning yourself. You clearly have a plan. Execute it. Destroy me. I'm not going to defend myself. If that's what it takes for you to feel justice was served, then I owe you that much. You don't get to play the martyr." Her voice cracked. "You don't get to make this easy on yourself by giving up. You're supposed to fight, to show me who you really are, to prove that I was right about you. Then what do you want from me?" He was shouting now too, all his carefully controlled walls crumbling. "What would be enough? What would balance the scales? Because I can't undo the past, Naomi. I can't go back and be the man I should have been. I can't give your mother back those 23 years. I can't—" He broke off, something hitting him with devastating force. 23 years. 23 years of his daughter's life he'd missed. Her first words, first steps, first day of school, every birthday, every triumph, every moment of pain, all of it gone, irretrievable. "I have a daughter," he said, the words strange in his mouth. "I have a daughter, and I didn't know. I have a daughter, and she hates me, and she should." The fight seemed to drain out of both of them simultaneously. Naomi sank into a chair, her carefully constructed armor cracking. Alexander sat across from her, separated by a conference table and 23 years of absence. "I don't know what I expected," Naomi said finally, her voice small. "I wanted you to be the villain. I needed you to be the villain. Because if you're the villain, then destroying you makes sense. But you're just—" She looked at him, really looked at him. "You're just a man who made terrible choices, and somehow that's worse." "I was the villain," Alexander said quietly. "Not to you directly, maybe, but to your mother. I was the worst kind of villain, the kind who convinced himself he was doing the right thing while doing something monstrous." "She still loves you," Naomi said, and the words were like knife wounds. "After everything, some part of her still loves you. I've seen her stare off into nothing, and I know she's thinking about you. 23 years, and she never dated, never remarried, never even tried. Because you broke something in her that never healed." Alexander felt something crack inside his chest, something he'd kept carefully walled off for decades. "I need to see her. I need to try to what? Apologize? Fix it? Alexander, there is no fixing this. The best you can do is—" She trailed off, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I don't even know. I came here with a plan, with purpose, and now I'm sitting across from my father for the first time in my life, and all I can think is that I want—" The door to the office burst open. Marcus, Alexander's head of security, stood there, his face grim. "Mr. Whitmore, we have a situation." "Not now, Marcus." "Sir, it's urgent. It's about the merger. Castellano Holdings. They've been investigating your personal life. They know about Miss Richards. They know she's your daughter, and they're threatening to leak it unless you back out of the deal." The room went cold. Alexander looked at Naomi, saw the shock and confusion on her face mirroring his own. "How do they know?" he asked. Marcus's expression darkened. "Because someone told them, someone who's been feeding them information for months, positioning you for this exact moment. They have evidence of everything, your relationship with Jasmine Carter, the pregnancy, the way you forced her out. They're ready to destroy your reputation and the company's stock price unless you walk away from the merger." "Who?" Naomi whispered. "Who's been feeding them information?" Marcus pulled out a folder, laid it on the table. Alexander opened it, and his blood turned to ice. The photographs were clear, damning. They showed Jasmine meeting with Marcus Castellano, the CEO of Castellano Holdings. Multiple meetings over the past 6 months. Documents changing hands. Jasmine, the woman he'd abandoned, the woman who'd carried his secret for 23 years, had partnered with his business rival to destroy him. But why and how had she even known about the merger? "There's more," Marcus said grimly. "Jasmine Carter filed a paternity suit this morning. She's claiming you owe 23 years of child support, plus damages for emotional distress and reputational harm. She's asking for $200 million. The suit was filed with Castellano's lawyers." Naomi stood so abruptly, her chair fell over. No, my mother wouldn't. She doesn't even care about money. She never wanted anything from him. Then how do you explain this? Marcus pulled out another document, a contract signed by Jasmine, agreeing to cooperate with Castellano Holdings in exchange for a $10 million payment and a percentage of any financial settlement from Alexander. The betrayal hit Alexander from 2 directions at once. Naomi, his daughter, who'd been planning to destroy him, and Jasmine, his first love, who'd apparently been planning the same thing from a different angle. He'd been surrounded, set up, positioned perfectly for devastation. "Get out," he said quietly. "Mr. Whitmore, both of you get out. Now." Naomi stared at him, her face pale. "Alexander, I didn't know about my mother's plan. I swear, I didn't—" "Get out!" His roar echoed through the office. Naomi grabbed her things and fled, tears streaming down her face. Marcus hesitated, then followed, leaving Alexander alone with the wreckage of his revelation. He stood at his window, looking out at the city he'd conquered, and realized he'd never felt more alone. His daughter hated him. His first love had betrayed him. His empire was under siege. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a question was forming, a question that would lead him to a truth far more devastating than anything he'd yet discovered. If Jasmine had spent 23 years in quiet dignity, never asking for anything, why would she suddenly partner with his enemy? What had changed? What had pushed her to this point? The answer, when it finally came, would expose a conspiracy that went back decades, a conspiracy that involved not just Jasmine and Castellano, but Alexander's own board members, his late father, and a secret that would redefine everything he thought he knew about his life, his family, and the empire he'd built on lies. Jasmine sat in the tiny office of her flower shop, her hands shaking as she stared at the documents spread before her. She'd never wanted this, never wanted any of it. But sometimes survival meant making choices you never thought you'd make. Sometimes protecting the people you loved meant becoming someone you barely recognized. The truth was far more complicated than Naomi knew, far more complicated than Alexander could imagine. It had started 6 months ago, when a man in an expensive suit had walked into her shop, Marcus Castellano. She'd recognized him immediately from business magazines, Alexander's primary rival, a man whose corporate battles with Whitmore Industries were legendary. "Ms. Carter," he'd said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Or should I say, Ms. Carter Whitmore, since you were never officially divorced." The words had hit her like a physical blow. "I was never married to Alexander Whitmore." "No." He'd pulled out a document, laid it on her counter. "Then perhaps you can explain this marriage certificate filed in Las Vegas 24 years ago, or this annulment petition filed by Alexander's lawyers 6 months after you left, claiming you'd never been legally married because you'd used a false identity." Jasmine had stared at the documents, her heart hammering. She remembered that weekend in Vegas. Alexander had been celebrating a major business victory, and in the intoxicated happiness of being young and in love, they'd gotten married in one of those absurd chapels. It had seemed romantic at the time, impulsive and passionate. When she'd told him she was pregnant 3 months later, he'd never mentioned the marriage. She'd assumed it had been annulled immediately, a youthful mistake erased. The annulment was denied," Castellano continued. The judge ruled that your identity was valid, the marriage was legal, and Alexander's petition was an attempt at fraud. Your marriage was never legally dissolved. That's impossible. I would have been notified. The notification was sent to an address that no longer existed. You'd moved by then, trying to escape, I imagine. The document was returned as undeliverable, and the case was closed. But the marriage stands, which means, Missy Carter, that you're entitled to half of everything Alexander Whitmore has built over the last 23 years. We're talking about $10 billion. The room had spun. Why are you telling me this? Because I want to destroy Alexander Whitmore, and you're the key to doing it. Help me, and I'll make sure you and your daughter are set for life. Refuse, and I'll leak the information about your marriage to the press. Either way, Alexander's empire will crumble. The only question is whether you benefit from it or get crushed under it. Jasmine had tried to refuse, had tried to protect Alexander despite everything he'd done. But Castellano had been persistent, patient. He'd shown her photographs of Naomi, following her, watching her. The threat had been implicit but clear. Cooperate or your daughter pays the price. So she'd cooperated. She'd attended the meetings, signed the documents, played her part in the conspiracy, and she'd hated every moment of it, hated what she was becoming. But she'd done it to protect Naomi, only to discover that Naomi had her own plan for revenge, her own path to destruction. Now, sitting in her shop at 2 a.m, Jasmine's phone rang. Alexander's name appeared on the screen, the first time he'd called her in 23 years. She answered, her hand trembling. Alexander. Why? His voice was raw, broken. After all these years, why now? It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. Tell me how you could do this. To me, to us, to Naomi. To protect her. Jasmine's voice cracked. Castellano threatened her. Alexander. He said if I didn't cooperate, he'd destroy her career, her reputation, everything she's worked for. What was I supposed to do? The line went silent for so long she thought he'd hung up. Finally, where are you? My shop, Brooklyn. I'm coming. We need to talk. Really talk. For the first time in 23 years. Alexander, please, Jasmine. Please. The word, that single please, undid her. She'd never heard him beg for anything. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face, and whispered, "Okay." He arrived 40 minutes later, pulling up in front of her shop in a car that probably cost more than she'd made in a year. But when he stepped inside, stripping off his coat and looking around at the modest space she'd built, the flowers she'd arranged with such care, the photographs of Naomi on her desk, the evidence of a life built from nothing, he looked smaller somehow, vulnerable. "You did this yourself?" he asked quietly. "Everything, every flower, every arrangement, every customer relationship, I built it from nothing. Like you built Naomi from nothing. While I built an empire on money and ruthlessness." They stood on opposite sides of the shop, two people who'd once loved each other desperately, now separated by decades of pain. "Tell me everything," Alexander said. "No more secrets, no more lies. Tell me what really happened." So Jasmine told him about the pregnancy and the poverty and the fear, about working 3 jobs while attending night classes to get her GED, then her associate's degree, then finally opening the shop, about raising Naomi alone, about the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, about the strength she'd had to find when she had nothing left, about the marriage certificate she'd never known was still valid, about Castellano's threats, about the impossible choice between protecting her daughter and destroying the man she'd once loved. "And I never stopped loving you," she admitted finally, the words torn from some deep place. "I hated you. God, how I hated you. But I never stopped loving you. And that's the worst part. 23 years, Alexander. And I still can't look at the sky at sunset without thinking of the night you proposed. Yes, proposed because you did propose in Vegas, when we were too drunk and too in love to think clearly. I still remember every word you said. Marry me, Jasmine. Marry me because I can't imagine a future without you in it. And then I threw you out. His voice was hollow. I broke every promise I ever made to you. Yes. I don't know how to fix this, any of it. You can't fix it, Alexander. Some things are too broken to repair, but maybe... She moved closer, the distance between them shrinking for the first time in 23 years. Maybe we can build something new. Maybe we can stop being the people who hurt each other and become the people who protect our daughter. Together. He looked at her, really looked at her. And she saw something she hadn't seen in his eyes since the day he'd thrown her out. Genuine emotion, raw and unguarded. I've missed you every day, he whispered. Every single day for 23 years. I told myself I was better off, that I'd made the right choice. But every success felt hollow because you weren't there. Every triumph was meaningless because I'd lost the only person who'd ever made me feel like I was more than just my ambition. Alexander, he closed the distance between them, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that broke her heart. I was a coward. I was selfish and ambitious and stupid. I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too afraid to be vulnerable. And I've regretted it every day since. We can't go back. I know, but maybe we can go forward. Maybe we can. The door burst open. Naomi stood there, her face pale, her eyes wild. Mom, we need to leave. Now. Castellano isn't who you think he is. I've been digging into his background and... She stopped, seeing Alexander. What is he doing here? Naomi, please, let me explain. Explain what? That you've been working with his enemy to destroy him. I saw the documents, Mom. I know about the lawsuit, the marriage certificate, everything. How could you? To protect you. He threatened you. I don't need your protection. I needed you to trust me, to tell me the truth, to not make deals with monsters behind my back. Naomi, Alexander said, stepping forward, don't blame your mother. This is my fault. All of it. If I hadn't been such a coward 23 years ago, none of this would be happening. You think I care about your guilt? Naomi's laugh was bitter. You think your regret fixes anything. You abandoned us. You let us struggle and suffer and... Her voice broke. You let me grow up without a father, wondering what was so wrong with me that you couldn't even try. Nothing was wrong with you. Everything was wrong with me. Stop! She was crying now, all her carefully constructed walls crumbling. Stop saying the things I needed to hear 23 years ago. Stop being human and vulnerable because I need you to be the monster. I need... Alexander moved forward and pulled her into his arms. For a moment, she stood rigid, resisting. Then she collapsed against him, sobbing like the child she'd never gotten to be around him. I'm sorry, he whispered into her hair. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm sorry for every day I wasn't there, for every moment I missed, for every time you needed a father and I was too selfish and blind to realize what I'd thrown away. Jasmine watched them, her daughter and the man who'd broken her heart, and felt something shifting, rearranging. This wasn't how she'd imagined this moment. She'd thought if they ever confronted Alexander, there would be rage and recrimination and justice. She'd never imagined there would be tears and tenderness and the painful, fragile possibility of forgiveness. But then Naomi pulled back, her face hardening. Wait, why did you say I need to leave? What did you find out about Castellano? Naomi pulled out her phone, hands still shaking. I ran a background check on everyone involved in this merger, standard due diligence. But when I started digging into Castellano's history, I found something. 24 years ago, he was engaged to be married to a woman named Elena Whitmore. The name hung in the air like a grenade. Alexander's face went white. That's impossible. Elena was my sister. She died in a car accident 24 years ago. Did she? Naomi's voice was quiet, deadly, because I found her death certificate. And I found something else. A police report that was buried, sealed by order of someone with enough power and money to make evidence disappear. The accident wasn't an accident, Alexander. Someone tampered with her brakes. Someone wanted her dead. No! Alexander's voice was barely audible. No, that can't be. And here's where it gets interesting. Elena's fiancé, Marcus Castellano, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Whitmore Industries. He claimed that Elena had discovered something, some financial fraud or illegal activity, and that she'd been killed to keep her quiet. The lawsuit was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, and 3 months later, Castellano used that money to start his own company, the company that's now your biggest rival. Jasmine felt ice forming in her veins. What? You're saying this entire thing, the merger, the threats, all of it, has been about revenge? I'm saying Marcus Castellano has spent 24 years building his empire for one reason, to destroy Alexander Whitmore. And we've been his weapons. Naomi looked between them, her face pale. He used Mom to destabilize you emotionally and legally. He used me to get inside your company and access your confidential information. We were never in control. We were pawns in a game that started before I was even born. Alexander was shaking his head, but Jasmine could see understanding dawning in his eyes. Horror and recognition. My father, after Eleanor died, my father became obsessed with company security, with protecting the family business at any cost. He died of a heart attack 6 months later. I always thought it was grief. But what if he was involved? Naomi finished. What if Elena discovered something about the company, something illegal, and your father had her killed? And what if Castellano has spent the last 24 years collecting evidence, waiting for the perfect moment to expose it? The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture more horrifying than any of them had imagined. Alexander moved to Jasmine's desk, sank into a chair. That's why he targeted you. Not just for revenge against me, but because he knew about Elena, knew I'd abandoned you. He knew that bringing you back into my life would destroy me in ways that business losses never could. He wanted me to feel what he felt, the loss of someone I loved, the guilt of failing to protect them. But he's not just after you, Naomi said urgently. The merger, it's a trap. Castellano Holdings has massive hidden debts. If the merger goes through, those debts become yours. Your company will be saddled with billions in liabilities. Within 6 months, Whitmore Industries will collapse. You'll lose everything. And the lawsuit from Mom? Legitimate. If he can prove the marriage was valid and never annulled, she's entitled to half your assets. Combined with the merger collapse, you'd be completely destroyed, financially, personally, professionally. Alexander looked at Jasmine. Did you know any of this? No. The word came out as a whisper. He told me he just wanted to hurt you financially. He never mentioned your sister, never mentioned revenge. I thought, her voice broke. I thought I was protecting Naomi, but I was just helping him destroy us all. We need to stop the merger, Naomi said, immediately, and we need to expose Castellano before he can do any more damage. It's not that simple, Alexander said quietly. If I back out now, Castellano can claim breach of contract. The penalties would be devastating. And if I expose him without proof, he'll sue for defamation. Either way, he wins. Then we get proof. Naomi's voice was steel. We have 48 hours before the merger is finalized. We use that time to find evidence of what he's done, to Elena, to the company, to all of us. We expose him, and we make sure he can never hurt anyone again. How? Naomi smiled, and it was predatory, brilliant, by giving him exactly what he wants. We make him think he's won. We let the merger proceed. But first, We quietly move the company's most valuable assets into a shell corporation that Castellano can't touch. We give him the empty shell, the debts, the liabilities. And while he's celebrating his victory, we rebuild from the shadows. That's illegal, Jasmine said. So is murder, so is extortion, so is threatening my mother. Naomi looked between them. We can play by the rules and let him destroy us, or we can fight back. What's it going to be? Alexander looked at his daughter, truly looked at her, and saw not just Jasmine's beauty, but his own ruthlessness, his own strategic mind. She was the best of both of them, forged in the fire of their mistakes. We fight, he said. Together, Jasmine added, reaching for his hand. Naomi nodded, then pulled out her laptop. Then let's get to work. We have 48 hours to save everything. As they huddled over the computer, plotting and planning, Jasmine felt something she hadn't felt in 23 years. Hope. Not hope that the past could be undone, but hope that maybe, despite everything, they could build a future together. But none of them knew that Marcus Castellano was watching them through the security camera he'd had installed in Jasmine's shop weeks ago, or that he was smiling because their plan, the plan they thought would save them, was exactly what he'd been waiting for them to attempt, or that the real conspiracy, the one that would destroy them all, was still hidden, waiting to detonate at the worst possible moment. Because sometimes the truth isn't just devastating. Sometimes it's fatal. The final pieces fell into place at dawn on the day of the merger. They'd worked through the night, the three of them, Alexander, Jasmine, and Naomi, united for the first time in their lives by necessity and the fragile beginning of something that might, eventually, become family. The office they'd commandeered was littered with coffee cups and legal documents, Alexander's jacket discarded, Jasmine's careful composure replaced by fierce determination, Naomi's strategic brilliance burning like wildfire as she orchestrated their counterattack. It's done, Naomi announced, hitting a final key on her laptop. The assets are transferred to the Shell Corporation. On paper, Whitmore Industries is about to acquire Castellano Holdings. In reality, you're giving him an empty shell filled with his own debts. The real company, the technology patents, the real estate holdings, the profitable subsidiaries, they're all protected under a new corporate structure that Castellano can't touch. And the lawsuit? Alexander asked. Jasmine looked up from the documents she'd been reviewing. I'm withdrawing it. The marriage certificate was real, but I'm agreeing to a formal annulment. No strings attached. I don't want his money, Alexander. I never did. I just wanted to protect Naomi. Mom, I'm entitled to what I've earned with my own hands, Jasmine said firmly. I built my life without him. I don't need to tear down his to feel strong. Alexander reached across the table, took her hand. The touch was electric, familiar, devastating. Thank you, but I want to provide for you, for both of you, not as payment or out of guilt, but because We're what? Naomi asked quietly. He looked at his daughter, and Jasmine saw tears in his eyes. You're my family, the family I was too blind and stupid to recognize, the family I threw away. And if you'll let me, if there's any chance at all, I want to try to be the father I should have been. I want to try to be the man you both deserved. The moment hung between them, fragile and precarious. Jasmine wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But 23 years of abandonment and pain weren't erased by one night of working together. It's not that easy, she said finally. You can't just snap your fingers and become a family. We barely know each other anymore. You're essentially a stranger who happens to share DNA with our daughter. Then let me not be a stranger. Let me learn who you are now, who you've become. Let me earn your trust. And what happens when it gets hard? Jasmine's voice cracked. And what happens when your board questions your choices, when the media finds out, when it becomes inconvenient to have a daughter with a black mother who was never part of your world, What happens when we're not a strategic advantage anymore? I don't know, Alexander admitted. I don't know how to be a father. I don't know how to be in your life without causing more pain, but I want to try. I want to show up every day and keep showing up until maybe you can believe that I'm not going anywhere. Words are easy, Naomi said, her voice hard. You said beautiful words to my mother 23 years ago, and then you threw her out. You're right. Words are meaningless, so let me show you. Alexander pulled out his phone, made a call. Marcus, I need you to execute the asset transfer we discussed. Yes, all of it. Do it now. He hung up, then pulled up a document on his laptop, turned it so they could both see. It was a trust agreement, being created in real time. This trust contains 50% of my personal wealth, not the company holdings, not the protected assets, but my personal fortune. Approximately $6 billion. It's being placed in an irrevocable trust for Naomi, with Jasmine as the trustee. You control it, both of you. If I disappear again, if I fail you again, you have the resources to build any life you want. You're not dependent on me. You're not at my mercy. You have power. Jasmine stared at the screen, her heart hammering. Alexander, that's the only way I know to prove I'm serious. Money is the only language I've ever really spoken. So I'm giving it to you. No strings attached, no control on my end. Take it, and at least you'll never have to worry about survival again. At least I can give you the security I should have provided 23 years ago. Naomi was staring at him, her expression unreadable. This is a grand gesture, but it doesn't change the past. No, nothing can change the past, but maybe it can change the future. Before anyone could respond, Alexander's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, frowned. It's Castellano. Don't answer it, Naomi said quickly. Not yet. We need to... But Alexander was already answering, putting it on speaker. Marcus. Alexander. Castellano's voice was smooth, amused. Congratulations on your clever little plan. Moving your assets to a shell corporation, setting me up to acquire an empty shell. Very creative. I expected nothing less. The room went cold. You knew? Alexander said. Of course I knew. Did you really think I spent 24 years planning this revenge without preparing for every possible countermove? I had cameras in Jasmine's shop, taps on all your phones, people inside your security team. I've known every step of your plan since the moment you started formulating it. Jasmine felt her blood turn to ice. Then why let us continue? Because I wanted you to feel hope. I wanted you to believe you could win. It makes what comes next so much sweeter. His laugh was cold. The merger is still happening, Alexander. And when it does, you're not just getting my debts, you're getting something much worse. Evidence. Incontrovertible evidence of what your father did to my Elena. Evidence that Whitmore Industries was built on fraud, on murder, on decades of criminal activity. Evidence that you personally benefited from that fraud. When that evidence goes public, and it will, the moment the merger is final, your company won't just collapse. You'll go to prison, and Jasmine, Naomi, everyone connected to you will be destroyed in the aftermath. You're bluffing, Naomi said, but her voice shook. Am I? Let me read you something. November 14th, 2001. Met with Elena Whitmore today. She's discovered the offshore accounts. She knows about the embezzlement, about the falsified financial reports, about everything. She's threatening to go to the authorities. I told Father, he says he'll handle it. That's from your personal journal, Alexander. The one you thought you'd destroyed. I have the original, locked away, one of many pieces of evidence that will bury you. Alexander's face had gone white. I was 23 years old. I didn't know what he was planning. But you suspected, didn't you? And you did nothing. You let him handle it. And 3 days later, your sister was dead. That makes you complicit, Alexander. That makes you an accessory to murder. The words landed like blows. Jasmine looked at Alexander and saw the truth in his face. The guilt, the shame, the knowledge that Castellano was right. "What do you want?" Alexander asked, his voice hollow. "And I want you to feel what I felt. I want you to lose everything, your company, your freedom, your family. I want you to spend the rest of your life in prison, knowing that everyone you love suffered because of your choices." "Then take me," Alexander said suddenly. "Let the merger happen. Let the evidence come out. I'll confess to everything. I'll take full responsibility for what my father did, for my role in covering it up. But leave Jasmine and Naomi alone. They're innocent. They had nothing to do with any of this." "No." The word was flat final. Naomi stood, her hands clenched into fists. "Why? Why isn't his suffering enough? Why do you need to hurt us too?" "Because you're his weakness." Castellano's voice was soft, almost gentle. "Because knowing your suffering will hurt him more than anything I could do to him directly. Because Elena was my weakness, and when she died, I learned that love is just another weapon. I'm going to use his love for you to destroy him completely." "Unless," came a new voice, and everyone froze. The door to the office opened, and a woman walked in. She was in her 50s, elegant, with dark hair shot through with silver and eyes that seemed to contain decades of pain and secrets. "Unless you're willing to finally tell the truth about what really happened to Elena," the woman said. "Hello, Marcus. It's been a long time." Castellano's voice over the phone turned to ice. "That's impossible. You're dead." "Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated." The woman smiled, but it was a sad, broken thing. "Hello, Alexander. Hello, Jasmine. And you must be Naomi. You have your mother's eyes." Alexander was staring at her like he was seeing a ghost. "Elena?" The woman who should have been dead for 24 years nodded. "I'm sorry it took me so long to come home, but I needed Marcus to reveal himself, to show everyone who he really is. And now, finally, I can tell you the truth about what happened all those years ago." The story Elena told shattered everything they thought they knew. She hadn't died in that car accident 24 years ago. She'd staged it with the help of a friend who worked for the police, because she'd discovered something that would have gotten her killed if she'd stayed. Marcus Castellano, the man she'd been engaged to marry, was the one embezzling money from Whitmore Industries. He'd been systematically draining the company's offshore accounts, planning to bankrupt the Whitmore family and build his own empire on their ruins. "I found the evidence in his apartment," Elena said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "Account numbers, transfer records, everything. I confronted him, and he didn't even try to deny it. He just looked at me and said, 'Your family destroyed mine. Now I'm returning the favor.' His father had worked for Whitmore Industries, had been fired for incompetence and died broken. Marcus blamed my father, blamed our whole family. He'd spent years positioning himself, seducing me, getting close to us, all so he could destroy us from the inside." "So you faked your death," Jasmine said quietly. "I didn't know what else to do. I was 22, terrified. And I knew if I went to my father, he'd kill Marcus. My father was capable of terrible things when it came to protecting the family business. So I ran. I staged the accident, let everyone believe I was dead, and I disappeared. But the evidence about father," Alexander said, "the embezzlement, the fraud, that was all Marcus," Elena said. "He planted evidence, falsified documents, created a trail that led back to our father. He wanted to frame the Whitmores, to make it look like we were the criminals. When he couldn't destroy us financially, he decided to destroy us with scandal." Alexander's voice was barely a whisper. "I spent 24 years thinking father was a monster, that he'd had you killed to protect the company. He wasn't a monster. He was just a man trying to protect his family, and his guilt over losing me, over thinking he'd failed to protect me, that's what killed him." Eleanor moved to her brother, took his hands. "I'm sorry, Alexander. I'm sorry I let you believe that. I'm sorry I stayed away so long. But I needed proof, real proof of what Marcus had done, and that took time. How? Naomi asked. How did you get proof? Because I spent 24 years tracking his operations, documenting every move, building a case, and 3 months ago I finally had enough, but I needed him to reveal himself completely, to show his true colors. So I created a scenario that would force his hand. She looked at Jasmine, at Naomi. I'm sorry you got caught in the middle of this. I never wanted innocent people to be hurt. Then why didn't you just go to the police? Jasmine demanded. Because Marcus Castellano has spent 24 years building power, buying influence, placing people in positions of authority. If I'd just presented my evidence, it would have been buried, dismissed. I needed him to expose himself, to show everyone his capacity for cruelty. I needed witnesses. You used us as bait, Alexander said, understanding dawning. I gave you a chance to be heroes, and you took it. You chose family over empire, love over revenge. That's more than Marcus ever did. That's more than I thought you were capable of, Alexander. The phone was still connected, and Castellano's voice cut through the revelation like a blade. Very touching, Elena, but it doesn't change anything. I still have the evidence. I still have the power to destroy you all. No, Marcus, you don't. Elena pulled out a flash drive. Everything you have is falsified. I have the originals, the real financial records, the proof of your embezzlement. I have witness statements from people you bribed or threatened. I have recordings of our conversations, including the one where you admitted you planned to murder me if I didn't leave quietly. I have everything, and it's already been delivered to the FBI. The silence on the line was absolute. It's over, Elena said quietly. Your revenge, your empire, all of it, it's over. You spent 24 years building toward this moment, and you lost. Did I? Castellano's voice had changed, become soft and dangerous. Maybe. But I'm not going down alone. If I'm finished, I'm taking everyone with me, including your precious family, Elena. The line went dead. What does he mean? Naomi asked, fear creeping into her voice. Elena's face had gone pale. The merger. He's going to... She pulled out her phone, started frantically dialing. We need to stop the finalization. If he has access to Whitmore Industries systems, if he's placed malware or ransomware or... It's too late, came a new voice from Alexander's computer. A video window had opened, showing Castellano in what looked like an office, his face calm, despite everything. The merger was finalized 10 minutes ago, while you were all enjoying your tearful reunion. And I've just activated a virus in Whitmore Industries' financial systems. In approximately 5 minutes, every account will be emptied, every asset will be transferred to offshore accounts that can't be traced, and your company will cease to exist. You can't, Alexander started, but Castellano cut him off. I can, and I am. You took everything from me, Elena. You ruined my life. So now I'm going to ruin yours, all of yours. Stop the transfer, Naomi said suddenly, her voice cutting through the panic. Mom, the Shell Corporation protocol, can you reverse it? Jasmine was already moving, typing rapidly on her laptop. If I can access the backup servers before the virus completes its cycle. You have 3 minutes, Castellano said, and he was smiling now, enjoying their panic. 3 minutes before everything you've built is gone forever. The room exploded into controlled chaos. Naomi and Jasmine worked in tandem, their fingers flying over keyboards, racing against time. Alexander stood frozen, watching his entire world hang in the balance. Elena was on the phone with the FBI, trying to get them to intervene. 2 minutes. I can see the virus, Naomi said. It's sophisticated, military grade, but there's a back door, a fail-safe. It's locked behind a password, Jasmine said, her voice tight. 8 characters, alphanumeric. If we get it wrong 3 times, the system locks us out permanently. 1 minute, Elena, Naomi shouted. When you were engaged to Castellano, did he have a password he used for everything? Something personal? Elena's face went white. His father's name, Giuseppe, and the year he died, 1997. Jasmine typed, Giuseppe, 1997, incorrect password. 2 attempts remaining. Try his birthday, Alexander said. October 15th, 1977. Oct. 51977. Incorrect password. 1 attempt remaining. 30 seconds. Wait, Naomi said suddenly, staring at Castellano's image on the screen. Behind him, on his wall, was a photograph. Castellano standing with a young woman. Elena, who's in that photograph with him? Elena squinted at the screen. That's his sister, Maria. She died when she was 16. Car accident. He was devastated. What was her name? Her full name? Maria Castellano. Why? Because men like him don't create complex passwords. They create meaningful ones. They use the names of the people they've lost. Naomi looked at her mother. Try Maria, the year she died, and his father's initial, Maria 19992G. 10 seconds. Jasmine typed the password, her hands shaking. Maria 19992G. Access granted. Reverse the transfers, Naomi shouted. All of them, now! Jasmine's fingers flew across the keyboard. On screen, they could see account numbers shifting, transfers being cancelled, the virus being neutralized and contained. 3 seconds. 2, 1. The computer screen flashed green. Transfers reversed. Virus quarantined. All systems secure. The room exhaled collectively. On screen, Marcus Castellano sat very still, and for the first time, he looked old, beaten, destroyed. How? He whispered. Because we're not alone, Naomi said, standing. Because we have each other. Because family, real family, not revenge and obsession, that's the thing that makes us strong. You could have had that with Elena. You could have built a life instead of spending 24 years planning destruction, but you chose revenge over love, and that's why you lost. Federal agents were already arriving, the sound of sirens filling the air outside. Elena was directing them, pointing toward Castellano's location. The nightmare was ending, but for Alexander, Jasmine, and Naomi, something else was beginning. 3 months later, the flower shop had expanded, moved to a larger location in Manhattan. Jasmine had accepted Alexander's help, not as charity, but as investment in a business that was flourishing. The new space was beautiful, light-filled, and on opening day, it was packed with customers. Naomi stood at the entrance, watching her parents work together, Alexander arranging displays with surprising gentleness, Jasmine laughing at something he'd said. They weren't lovers, not yet. Maybe they never would be again. But they were partners, friends, 2 people learning to navigate a relationship built on ashes and hope. You did good, kid, Elena said, appearing beside her. Saved the day. We all did, Elena smiled. And you know, I spent 24 years dead, living in shadows, watching from the outside. I've seen a lot of families destroy themselves over less. But you 3, you chose each other. That takes courage. Or desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing. Elena squeezed her shoulder. Your father's trying, you know, really trying. Naomi watched Alexander pause in his work, pull out his phone, and show Jasmine something that made her laugh. The sound was like sunlight breaking through clouds. I know, Naomi said quietly, and that's what scares me, because if I let myself believe he's changed, if I let myself trust him, and then he leaves again, then you'll survive, like your mother did, like I did, like everyone who's ever been hurt and had to keep living anyway. Elena's voice was gentle. But if you never give him the chance, you'll never know what you could have had. And that's a different kind of loss. Alexander appeared in the doorway, looking slightly embarrassed. Naomi, do you have a minute? She followed him outside, where he'd parked his car, a modest sedan, not the luxury vehicles he used to drive everywhere. Another small change, another sign that he was trying to be different. "I wanted to give you something," he said, pulling out an envelope. "It's not much, but—" Inside was a photograph, old and faded. It showed a young Alexander, barely in his 20s, holding a newborn baby. The baby was wrapped in a pink blanket, and Alexander was looking down at her with an expression of pure wonder. "I don't understand," Naomi said. "This is you. The day you were born, I was there, Naomi. For 3 hours, I was there in the hospital. Your mother didn't know. She was sleeping, exhausted from labor. But the nurses let me hold you, just for a little while." Tears were streaming down Naomi's face. "You left. You held me, and then you left anyway." "Yes, and that's the worst thing I've ever done. But I wanted you to know, for those 3 hours, I loved you. I looked at your face, and I loved you completely. And then I got scared. Scared of what it meant. Scared of how it would change my life. Scared that I wouldn't be enough. So I ran. And I've regretted it every day since. Why are you telling me this now? Because I don't want there to be any more secrets between us. I don't want you to think I never cared, that you were just an inconvenience I erased. You were real to me. You are real to me. And if you'll give me the chance, I want to be real to you too. Not as a perfect father, I can never be that, but as a person trying to make up for the worst mistake of his life." Naomi looked at the photograph, at the young man she'd never known, holding the baby she'd been. "I'm not ready to call you Dad. I know. And I'm not ready to trust you completely. I know that too. But maybe—" She looked up at him, and for the first time, she let herself really see him. Not as the monster she'd built in her mind, not as the villain of her origin story, but as a flawed, broken man trying desperately to do better. "Maybe we can start with coffee. Sometimes, when I'm not too busy." The hope that lit his face was almost painful to witness. "I would like that very much." They stood there for a moment, neither quite sure how to bridge 23 years of absence with a single conversation. Finally, Naomi reached out and took his hand. It was a small gesture, but it felt enormous. Inside the shop, through the window, Jasmine watched them and felt something tight in her chest finally loosen. She'd spent 23 years being strong, being enough for both parents, carrying the weight of their survival alone. But maybe it was okay to share that weight now. Maybe it was okay to believe in second chances. "It's beautiful, what you've built here," a customer said, admiring an arrangement of African violets and white roses. Jasmine smiled, looking around at her shop, at her daughter, and the man who'd once broken her heart standing together in fragile hope outside, at Elena browsing bouquets with tears in her eyes because she'd finally come home. "Yes," she said quietly, "it really is." 6 months later, Alexander proposed. Not to Jasmine, though he wanted to, had been building toward it slowly, carefully, earning back her trust one day at a time. But to Naomi, "I want to be your father legally," he said, presenting her with adoption papers. "I know you're 23, and it's mostly symbolic, but symbols matter. I want your name to be Whitmore. I want the world to know you're my daughter. I want to make it official, permanent, real." Naomi had cried, signed the papers, and told him he was an idiot for thinking she needed his name to know who she was. But she signed anyway. 1 year later, Alexander did propose to Jasmine. In the same flower shop where they'd first started rebuilding their relationship, he got down on one knee and asked her to marry him, really marry him this time, with full awareness and intention and love that had been tested by fire. "We tried this once before," Jasmine said, tears streaming down her face. "In Vegas, drunk on love and too young to know better." "I know, and I threw it away. But if you'll give me another chance, I promise to spend the rest of my life proving that some mistakes can be redeemed, that some love is strong enough to survive even the worst betrayals. Marry me, Jasmine. Let me be the husband I should have been 24 years ago." She said, yes. The wedding was small, just family and close friends. Elena stood as Jasmine's matron of honor, a living reminder that sometimes people do come back from the dead, that miracles happen in the most unexpected ways. Naomi walked her mother down the aisle, and when the officiant asked who gave this woman to be married, Naomi said she gives herself because she's always been strong enough to stand alone. But today, she chooses to stand with someone else. At the reception, Alexander danced with his daughter for the first time. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "Thank you for giving me a second chance. Thank you for being brave enough to destroy me and then brave enough to forgive me." "I haven't forgiven you," Naomi said honestly. "Not completely. That's going to take time, maybe years, maybe forever." "I'll wait." "I know you will. That's why I'm trying." They danced in silence for a moment, and then Naomi added quietly, "Dad." The word made Alexander's eyes flood with tears. It was the first time she'd called him that. It felt like absolution, like grace, like the beginning of something neither of them had thought possible. Across the dance floor, Jasmine watched them and thought about all the years she'd spent alone, all the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, all the moments she'd been certain she'd never survive. And she thought about how she had survived, how she'd built a life and raised a daughter and created beauty from ashes. "No regrets?" Elena asked, appearing beside her with champagne. Jasmine considered the question seriously. "I regret what he did to us. I regret the years we lost, but I don't regret the person I became, and I don't regret that Naomi grew up seeing her mother as someone strong and independent, not someone who needed a man to complete her. Even now that you're marrying him, especially now, because I'm not marrying him out of need, I'm marrying him because I choose to, because I've built my own life, proven my own worth, and now I'm deciding to share that life with someone else. That's not weakness. That's power." Elena clinked her glass against Jasmine's. "To power, then, and to second chances. To truth," Jasmine added, "and to the people brave enough to face it." The party continued around them, music and laughter and the clinking of glasses. Marcus Castellano was serving 20 years in federal prison for embezzlement, fraud, and attempted corporate sabotage. Whitmore Industries was thriving under Alexander's renewed leadership, now with Naomi as the company's general counsel. Eleanor had reconciled with her brother and was working to rebuild her own life after 24 years of hiding. And Jasmine Carter, now Jasmine Whitmore, stood in her wedding dress, surrounded by family she'd thought she'd lost forever, and realized that sometimes the most devastating betrayals lead to the most profound redemptions. Sometimes the truth doesn't just set you free. It rebuilds you, transforms you, makes you into someone who can love without losing yourself, trust without surrendering your power, forgive without forgetting the lessons that made you strong. As the night wore on and the music played, Alexander pulled Jasmine close and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on us, even when I'd given up on myself." "I never gave up on us," she corrected gently. "I gave up on you. But I never stopped believing that love could look different, be different, mean something real instead of something that destroys. And now I believe we can build something worthy of the people we've become. Not the kids we were in Vegas, not the broken people we've been for the last 23 years, but the people standing here right now. Scarred, yes. Damaged, yes. But also stronger, wiser, and finally ready." They kissed as the music swelled, as Naomi watched with happy tears, as Elena smiled, knowing that sometimes the dead really do come back to life, and as the Manhattan skyline glittered beyond the windows like a promise kept. The billionaire had thrown her out while pregnant. Years later, His daughter had walked into his office planning to destroy him. But instead, they'd all destroyed the lies they'd been living with, the masks they'd been wearing, the versions of themselves that no longer served them, and from that destruction, they'd built something real, something lasting, something that proved that even the worst mistakes, the deepest betrayals, the most profound losses could be transformed into grace. Not easily, not quickly, and never, ever without cost. But sometimes, just sometimes, love is worth fighting for. Truth is worth facing, and family, in all its complicated, messy, beautiful reality, is worth choosing over and over again, even when it destroys you first, especially then.